Reflections. Flecks of Identity, Part 3. Excerpts from Media Ecologies, Materialist Energies in Art and Techno-Culture by Matthew Fuller. In discussing image processing technologies, the dynamics of the webcam, the network protocols they operate in relation to, and the particular affordances and constraints that they embody, we need also to relate how these images operate in terms of another form of processing: surveillance. Here, three modes of surveillance are discussed: abuse, chilling, and production. These terms, not by any means a comprehensive topology, apply to tendencies rather than categories, each of which carries with it its own scalar, perspectival terms of conceptual and practical affordance. They are offered simply for use and disposal rather than systemization. The first kind of figuration of surveillance is that which performs notorious abuse upon its objects, where the technology is actively used against them.
The British law on interception of communications prohibits the courts, that means judges or lawyers asking judges, to ask any questions at all about whether communications interception has taken place. You can't ask the questions and the evidence can't be introduced. Now that, in my view, is directly detrimental to the process of the courts. Such information can be very powerful, and it is brought into British courts provided the interception takes place abroad. So there's no fundamental issue here except hiding away what GCHQ does to protect its sectional interests, even if the disadvantage is justice.
Dreamy Smurf is the power management tool, which means turning your phone on or off without you knowing.
Even if I've turned my phone off.
Right.
And then we've got Nosy Smurf. What's Nosy Smurf?
Nosy Smurf is the hot miking tool. So for example, if it's in your pocket, they can turn the microphone on and listen to everything that's going on around you.
Even if my phone is switched off?
Even if your phone's switched off, because they've got the other tools for turning it on.
This is the kind of surveillance that David Lyon, following the tradition of sociology, calls modern. Such surveillance operates in economic, political, and technological terms. Albert Speer stated of the National Socialist command structure that it was the first industrial dictatorship in the age of communications technology. In an extract from his memoirs, the Third Reich's chief architect, then its director of Ministry of Foreign Armaments and Munitions, proposed that telephones, teletypes, and radios made it possible to relay messages from the highest levels directly to the lower echelons. This state system may seem as confusing as the wires of a switchboard to an outsider, but like the switchboard, it could be controlled and dominated by someone's will. The means of communications alone make it possible to merchandise the work of the lower echelons. Whether this constitutes a historical first or not, possibly so in terms of electronic media, the tendency is adequately conveyed here. Such a system is surveillance reconfigured as diagrammatic workout of command, control, communications, and intelligence. The command is simply given. Receiver simply becomes output for sender. There is no chance for misinterpretation, of noise, or of feedback. This is the fantastic vision of the eye at the center of the storm that spun Bertelli's craft for Mussolini's blemishless head 360 degrees. The greatest atrocity of this form of surveillance is when everything is as it should be. Here, communications and intelligence merely serve as confirmation of subordination. The head has no need but to be empty. This mode of surveillance operates only at a particular scalar level. It is dependent on the dimensions of relationality conjoined by any number of discrete and linked acts of surveillance that have the power to couple information about a person or a process with an unavoidable change. it demands repressive power.
The software that a lot of these devices use is capable of capturing things like your text messages, the numbers you're calling and receiving calls from. We know for sure they're getting people's location.
As Foucault suggests, power represses only in extremis. The calculation as to what constitutes such an extreme varies, however, from one historical situation or ideology to another. Power operates, as a matter of course, in every fold and exchange of life. That particular state forms ally themselves with a ferocious, libidinal, and aesthetic state of emergency involving and inducing limitless militarization of all of the zones and processes of the planet as partner to their capitalization testifies simply to their hunger for an absolutism without limits. Such dynamics do not exist in a clean sense. They exist as chronic organizational spasms, ghosts cut free of any originary utility. The various police forces cannot be understood to have any crime-fighting rationale in their consistent use of stop-and-search procedures, under whatever legislative or procedural name and routine they are coded. Nevertheless, despite repeated confirmations of their lack of relation to their stated utility, there is no sign of any let-up in such operations. Simple colorblind technocratic repression of the kind desired by all good citizens cannot account for this. Power must chase the merest scraps of its own ghosts. Nicholas Mirsov describes the empire of camps. These are the camps of internment, the limbo of terrorist suspects without legal status, or of refugees with a cruelly precise status as ghosts, compelled to await some glorious future fate. In the regime of maquiladoras, camp factories uncannily like those at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, sited at border zones for the benefit of cheap people. The camps are designed to turn those inside into ghosts, and at the same time to maintain low-waged manufacturing workers in their place in the global marketplace and reduce the social welfare costs of the advanced nations to the lowest possible point. Mirtsov observes the common construction of such camps, a regime of low-cost holding units, sharply fenced, slathered in the cheap insecurity of CCTV, is different from the overused figure of the panopticon in that there are no all-seeing specter implied by the physical architecture. Actuarial surveillance gains preeminence as a coefficient of architecture, because those held in such camps are not deemed worthy of anything approaching an apparatus of moral improvement, as was posited by Bentham. Camps are there for holding, a phase space with no temporal dimension, no evolution. An old warehouse or empty ship will do. While power chases its own ghosts, we can be reminded of Hannah Arendt's accounts of camps in The Origins of Totalitarianism, that such camps are always rational. Camps are always laboratories. Generalized chilling is the effect of knowing that surveillance is going on, that surveillance is imminent, not just located in definable processes or spaces, but smeared from one zone to the next. As often as not, surveillance provides a means of such movement, such networking of processes and structures. It guarantees transit of a standard object. At the same time, generalized chilling operates by being non-localized as much as networked. It works by being not quite apparent, by positing a maybe state. Here, a homogeneous social body is produced by virtue of what lies outside it. Cling to the ragged raft of security, lest the waves suck you under. There are two options if you don't hold on tight: drown under the thick sea of truncheons, or that of crime. In the meantime, there are plenty of forms for you to fill in, some buttons to press. A simple model of chilling is one that suggests that certain things are not done because it is known that to do them is to infract a rule. A wholeness of being is kept in check behind a set of lines. Being is repressed. Watch out. It may explode or become rotten.
Unlike conventional advertising, geofencing advertising allows you to target people based on their physical activities and the places they go. You can serve static banner or video ads directly to people in very precise locations, all the way down to the contours of buildings, such as competitor locations, stores, and even individual homes. This is how it works. When the location services on a mobile device or in a mobile app is turned on, our technology captures the device ID whenever a prospect walks into the virtual geofence we built. Once prospects are placed into our retargeting pool, we can serve your ads across hundreds of thousands of mobile apps and websites while those consumers are inside the geofence, and even up to 30 days or more after they left the geofence.
In many ways, this is the model adopted by pro-privacy campaigns. It is not fully adequate, however, in that it assumes a static and pre-existing, or natural whole being, or state of communication that is marred by an outside. From a scalar perspective of mobilizing against particular forms of surveillance, it may have its useful effects. It does, after all, operate on a scale of the individual who is summoned into being and called to account by law. But to accept it fully would be to block a more nuanced understanding of the processes of surveillance. A further model of the chilling effects of surveillance suggests that it occurs not solely from any array of single points, but mutually and in a networked fashion. Surveillance operates by means of norms, affordances, and expectations, the enculturation of probabilities by the brokering and sublimation of will to power. This begins to be useful, but it needs also to be coupled with the ways in which surveillance produces its objects of knowledge, captures them from other scalar and perspectival dynamics, makes events and problematics, syncretizes dimensions of relationality, in short, acts productively. There are two senses in which we can read the way in which surveillance systems engage and produce subjectivation. First, it is easy to say that surveillance produces behaviors. This is the positive dimension of the effect of chilling, its educative function. A good citizen learns to do the right thing. There is also a second function of surveillance, that it produces new objects. It is useful here to describe two well-known models of surveillance, that of discipline, proposed by Foucault, and its supplement, described by Deleuze, following William Burroughs, that of control. In the first model, social organizations produce a homogeneous body, a machine, an army, a school, a movement that is divided up and conjoined by rooms, by scripts, special furniture, uniforms, devices, modes of address, examinations. As a person moves through life, he or she shuttles from one to another of these regimes. At every point in this series of transitions, there is some capacity of recording or of watching that marks and ensures conformity to discipline. Such systems are always virtual as much as actual. That is, they describe the extreme end of a particular tendency. There is always and in everything a rich current of disobedience, infraction, and mutiny that such a schematic cannot contain. In the second model, that of control, social ordering moves into a mode that is characterized by a series of overlapping procedures of modulation. Life, activity, becomes a flowing force that is gated, transducted, filtered, recombined, rendered positive as if it were a stream of data. Within this context, it becomes possible to describe flecks of identity, in their existence as standard objects, within databases as a primary compositional element within surveillance systems. This is what, at its scalar levels, control sees, an informational token of conformity or infraction. An element, cluster, or concatenation of data, flecks of identity, a number, a sample, a document, racial categorization, are features that identify the bearer as belonging to particular scalar positions and relations. Such flecks are processed in ways that make them resolvable, contradictory, that make them bear, given certain forms of interpretation, certain values, deprecations, or openings, and are made usable. The citizen has a place, a speed, a set of functions as a variable within a social, bodily, and technical algorithm. At this point, it is useful to make clear the conjunction of the two terms meme and fleck of identity. Under the rubric of monitorability demanded by meme theory as an epistemology, that it requires an identifiable isolate, the meme, we can say that the processes constituting control make a similar demand. They require identifiers, tags. Within the society of control, the meme is transducted as a fleck of identity. In a process society, being able to access, deploy, or simulate the correct informational qualities guarantees all ports access. Otherwise, access denied. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Revelation 13:16-17. In a disciplinary formation, surveillance leads to a separate stage of control. Under control, surveillance and control are the same process. Behavior is a waveform to be modulated. Surveillance as a term applies too much to real time. It refers backward to pairs of unseen eyes. Surveillance, in the contemporary sense, needs also to indicate prediction and production. Lyon and Gandhi have both used the term sorting to describe this active and constructive processual surveillance. Sorting is the result of the monstrous capacity for programming, for processing developed in mechanization, industrialization, reappearing at another degree of magnitude in computation. Recording, comparing, networking, prediction, calculating to variable degrees of accuracy, identifying, pattern finding, risk management. Such behavior is always linked to effectivity, to other patterns of action, sanction, correction, punishment, inclusion, reward, exclusion, billing, qualification, grading. Data is coordinated and passed between different channels and institutional, electronic, and commercial agencies where once it would not have existed in an analyzable or transmittable form.
I know that you were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
And let us be clear, surveillance in the present context applies very little to acts of seeing. Surveillance is a socio-algorithmic process. Flecks of identity are variables and events. From the perspectival scale of such systems, life is a trail of triggers and tokens. Date, time, location, status, speed, choice, amount, accomplices. Surveillance not simply as eyes, but rather as a processual dynamic of composition occurring in and as a phase space, occurs not just in space, but in history. Such developments are, in part, a consequence of digitization and the particular form of seamlessness that it affords. Once something is stored on a computer, it becomes relatively easy to transfer it to another. The development of intermediary protocols and languages and the developing fields of interoperability serve only to increase this tendency, despite the equally prevalent rise in the privatization of protocols and their contestation by open standards. Such data is also extremely easy to store, and as Gandhi notes, the storage of data for potential, as yet undetermined future use becomes, thanks to the relative consistency of the decline in cost of data storage, owing to the cloudburst of the mathematico-industrial drives in computing, suggests that it becomes increasingly cheap to store any data generated by any kind of transaction. Such capacity for storage provides the potential for systems geared to generalized chilling to switch into notorious abuse if they are captured at any future time by a different or modified compositional formation. Alongside digitization, we see the increased gathering, generation, and sale of data by private companies. The privatization of record keeping, data mining, polling, predication, and security processes within society mean that in an echo of the transition the other way, such data comes closer to the status of money. It becomes a commodity, alienable, transferable across contexts, as abstract as a concept, and with an equally uncanny power to latch onto life. Thus, both the digitization and the capitalization of data change it into something new. They create a generalized relation of dimensionality, in which control becomes as much a function of capitalisms as of the state or institutions. Perspectival systems more flex of identity to particular relations of dimensionality. In doing so, they produce, or attempt to channel, the fields of interlocking constraints and affordances from which the future is spawned. This is an attempt to guard against the risks of liability or need, just as digitalization and capitalization have tended to differentiate the functions of capital and the state, what David Lyon has called actuarial surveillance. Surveillance for the purposes of protection against and the calculation and brokering of risks becomes also part of the function of the police. As such, surveillance is a mode of social orchestration that operates, not according to some shared standard of morality and justice, but according to merely utilitarian norms. It tends to bypass the language of justice. Lyon's insight in naming actuarial surveillance is substantial in that it makes the systems of contemporary control as processes of modulation visible at the scale both of everyday life and of the systems operating on and in life at a more macroscopic scale, and intensively and extensively monitored over time. Think of life insurance or of epidemiology as models, writing and shaping waves of life and death via statistics and millions of interlocking probabilities. In such cases, any act or installation of surveillance becomes a solely pragmatic interplay between multiple dimensions of relationality. Cash flow, risk, personal availability, estates management, urban and architectural planning, the interrogability of recording and predictive mechanisms, the personal and response requirements of particular media systems, public or private, demands for an image of safety. The gruesome managerialism of contemporary state discourse is too often simply an attempt to reduce such complexity to a capsule dense enough to be swallowed. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. Such apparent pragmatism is, however, not quite capable of providing a coherent or even manageable coding to the will to power that these various systems embody and draw together. Projective surveillance hungers for the perfect preemptive capture of crime in its primordial, embryonic state. Predictive data mining searches for the desire to shop in its raw, unnameable, infinitely plastic form, the unbearable yearning for answers, for finality, and for the ideally isolatable thing, mates with the schematic rollout of product plans. Mathematico-industrial drives, such as that encapsulated by the purported Moore's Law, as Gordon Moore explains, and as Paul Gilroy describes, that in terms of computing hardware in the overdeveloped world, the price of processing and memory drives by about 50% every 18 months, owing primarily to technical improvements, are one result of such coupling. Spectacular crashes and busts are another. What form will be taken by the spook's utopia of total information awareness, and its consumer-grade spin-offs remains to be experienced.
The Department of Homeland Security expects the threat environment to remain high in the United States over the next year.
That's right. The agency's annual report is used to evaluate the growing number of evolving foreign and domestic threats. It also provides an overview of the threat landscape to the public and other agencies for the year ahead.
Trump Media has begun testing an AI search engine on Truth Social that's powered by Perplexity. And some observers wonder what that partnership means for accuracy, transparency, and user experience. Truth Social is rolling out an AI-driven search feature. On Wednesday, Trump Media announced it has started public beta testing of a new tool named Truth Search AI, which the company says is powered by Perplexity. According to the announcement, the integration is intended to expand and improve the amount of information available to people using the platform by delivering context-aware answers with clear citations. A Perplexity representative told Business Insider that Truth Social is using the Perplexity Sonar API, but declined to share finer details about the agreement or the financial terms. That limited disclosure has already prompted questions from industry watchers about how closely platforms should explain the mechanics and commercial terms behind AI features.
According to the script, we live in a culture that sees things in individual terms. We construct oppositions or modifications to surveillance on the Enlightenment concepts of right to privacy and to property. But control lives off the mimetic part objects that are the Flecks of identity in a sorting system. Irises, fingerprints, postal codes, number plates, age, spending power, magazine subscriptions, criminal record, drug use, gender assignment, dates, location, racial category, medical records, credit rating, telephone use patterns, energy use, salary, insurance status, shampoo preference, local crime level and type, employment history, citation records. Control has no need of individuals per se, only as reference, as scalar nodes in the flows of cash, commodity, and behavior. Anthropocentric naivety, the banal warmth of the real, makes for a good cover story. For sure, the discourse of rights has its usefulness as a ruse, to preface a humanitarian bloodbath or to establish a threshold beyond which, at a particular scalar level, certain compositional dynamics may not pass, but it is not sufficient. The terms of such rights are always changeable by those who charter them. Such rights must be used, but they cannot be relied on. They are disposable. Instead of, or at the very least alongside of, demanding that surveillance conform to the conditions of a previous state, it is time to extend operations within, against, and outside such systems, and to explore the disruptive advantage of its particular qualities. Find the compositional terms enacted by control, transduce them, fold eyes back in on themselves, hide. Such are the terms of operation of a second-order memetics within the context of control. Lest Satan should take advantage of us, we are not ignorant of his devices. 2 Corinthians 2:11. In response to this, our media-saturated culture, enduring family bonds, and the warmth of true presence are too often traded for the cold, pale glow of screens. Social media, streaming platforms, and algorithmic feeds promise endless connection, yet offer only its shadow. We scroll, tap, and refresh, mistaking digital noise for intimacy, until absence begins to feel like presence. In this constant performance, identity splinters into marketable flecks, polished for visibility rather than formed in relationship. Into this digital fog, Scripture speaks with piercing clarity. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives. James 4:1-3. These words are not relics of a distant age. They read like a diagnosis of the modern heart, restless, scrolling, always reaching for something just out of reach. Our identity is not stitched together from pixels, but found whole in Jesus. We can find a true relationship in Jesus Christ, one not built on performance or visibility, but on grace, truth, and love. We are made in the image of God, not transient, anonymous bits of data. As 1 John 2:15 warns, we must not love the world or anything in the world, but instead let our minds be renewed, Romans 12:2, our hearts transformed, Ezekiel 11:19, and our souls restored in Him, Matthew 11:29.